Serena Williams, one of the most successful athletes of all time, has recently spoken out about using GLP-1 weight loss drugs. She says to lift the stigma around using medication. Today, I want to talk about that and what that means for sort of society and just my own reflections on it. So from the start, I'll say I'm not a medical person. So this isn't advice. This isn't anything that you should sort of take as 100%, but it's my own opinions. And for those of you that don't know, I did work as a PT in a gym, and I'm going to come at it from more of that angle and my experiences in terms of helping people with weight loss and the journeys that they go on during that. So firstly, what are GLP-1s? If you don't know by now, then I don't know where you've been living the last few years, but I'm going to start off by telling you the sciencey medical bit. So I'm going to read this bit out. GLP-1 drugs, which stands for glucagon-like peptide 1, are medications that mimic the action of the natural hormone GLP-1. GLP-1 is a hormone released by the gut after eating, which helps regulate blood sugar by stimulating insulin secretion and inhibiting glucagon release in a glucose-dependent manner. Physiologically, GLP-1 binds to receptors on pancreatic beta cells to increase insulin production and on alpha cells to inhibit glucagon secretion, collectively improving blood glucose control. Beyond blood sugar regulation, GLP-1 receptor agonists also promote feeling full by acting on brain centers, thereby reducing food intake and aiding weight management. In summary, these drugs are synthetic versions of a natural gut hormone used primarily to improve glucose control and promote weight loss. So it all sounds very sciencey, but the general thing is it helps with the insulin secretion. So these drugs have been used for years in diabetes management. It's only recently they've been brought out to more wider bases and more aimed at weight loss. So they help with that aspect of it and blood glucose control, which is obviously really important in that. But the other bit that it does, and this is maybe the more concerning bit, is it has an impact on the brain. So when we eat, when we start to feel full, our brain will tell us that we're feeling full. And everyone will know that feeling after Christmas dinner, that feeling that you just cannot eat any more food. But when we take this drug, it tells our mind that we're full when we're not. We might not have even eaten all day. So it's tricking the mind into feeling a certain way, which is completely the opposite of what the body is actually going to be feeling. And we'll get on to why that's a bit of a concern for me personally anyway, later on in this episode. In sort of preparation for this episode, I started looking up different famous people who have come forward about using these drugs. And I wanted to see sort of how many people had openly spoken about it, because Serena Williams is obviously a massive name, but I wasn't really that sure of who else had openly come out with it. Now, there were a few, a lot of names that I didn't really recognize, I'll be honest with you. But what struck me was, as I was looking down this article, which had photos of before and after, loads of the before photos weren't people who were like very overweight. They were bang average. And then after taking them, they were looking gaunt and really like malnourished almost. Now, when you look at the sort of celebrity space over the last however many years, there was a point maybe in the 2000s or just before where all of the models, everyone who was on a magazine cover was really incredibly skinny, too skinny, unhealthily skinny, and it set that unattainable sort of goals that led people in general public sort of going through these unhealthy eating habits to try and attain these. Now, in the last 10, 15 years, there's been this move to more body acceptance, and you've got the body positivity movement, all this stuff about big is beautiful, and you started seeing much larger people on these covers, and it was looking like people were starting to accept that. Now, whatever you think about that is maybe a different conversation, but this recent acceptance of these drugs and people using them who aren't even morbidly obese shows that a lot of that wasn't really true. People were just saying what they needed to say to sound like they were saying the right thing. Even if they didn't believe in it, they supported the body positivity movement. And we've now got to this point where people who aren't even fat are taking these drugs to look incredibly gaunt. So when we looked at these drugs originally, like I said, they were originally used for people with diabetes to help with their insulin control. The more that it becomes used as a way of losing weight, it's concerning that it's not only at a last resort point. So, my opinion, this drug should be used by maybe people who are morbidly obese who can't actually exercise because they're so large. Maybe disabled people who can't exercise, just to help them start to lose some of that weight. And obviously diabetes people. For me personally, and I'm going to go into that in a second about why I think it should be a last resort only thing. So I want to start by looking at the pros of this drug. So before I go into my concerns around it and around this sort of outcoming from Serena Williams, I want to speak about the pros. So let's get those out there. So in terms of our cardiovascular health, so these drugs can reduce our risk of major adverse cardiovascular events by up to 14%, 14%. So these trials consistently show that this class of drugs reduces the events in patients with type 2 diabetes, especially those at high cardiovascular risk. Looking at these drugs as well, cardiovascular mortality risk is reduced by approximately 34 to 48% within 2 years in some populations. Now that's a huge number, but obviously take it with a pinch of salt, but it's one of the stats that I pulled out. In terms of diabetes, now this is where this drug was originally used, and it's got, I think, maybe up to almost 20 years of experience in treating diabetes, and it's got benefits. So it enhances the insulin secretion and suppresses the glucagon release, helping to lower blood glucose levels. So they also assist with weight loss, and obviously that's a point that we're going to get onto shortly, and that aids in diabetes management and the overall metabolic health as well. There's also been a link between a reduction in all-cause mortality when looking at type 2 diabetes patients. So it can reduce all-cause mortality by approximately 12 to 13%. So again, it's quite a significant percentage, and benefits diabetes massively. Like I said, I think this drug should be used as a sort of last resort. So I think it should be used by people who are morbidly obese and cannot exercise, maybe disabled and cannot exercise, diabetes patients, as we've got a lot of evidence of the promises behind that. And that's roughly it. Maybe there's a few more that I'm missing, but in all of these scenarios as well, it needs to be guided by a professional. And that's another concern that I'm going to touch on in a moment, is there's a lot that needs to be done outside of just taking this drug. And that's where you need a professional to be guiding you along on that journey. Before I dive into some of my concerns around this drug, I want to talk about why I'm talking about it in the first place. So fitness has been a massive part of my lifestyle since I can remember. I've always played sports as a kid. I started going to the gym when I was 17 and have done ever since. So when I look at that and my time as a PT as well, personal trainer, when I think back to the people who I trained who got the best results, it was the ones that changed their mindset and they were really driven to actually make change. They did what I asked them to do on the days that I wasn't training them. If I was training them once a week for 1 hour, they did the work outside of that. They did their other sessions. They ate better, or at least they were aware of what they were eating so that we could then have that conversation going forward. And it comes down to that mindset shift, I think. So for me, mindset's a massive thing. And I think to just change your habits, but not your mindset, is not enough. You need to understand why you're doing what you're doing in order to make it long lasting. If you don't believe in what you're doing, you're not going to stick with it. This sort of leads us into my first concern with these drugs. And it's one of the most debated topics as well around it, is it an easy way out? So I think it can be an easy way out. I think this is where the people that need them are a very small minority, and people who are using them, because of how widely available they are, aren't the people that should be using them. Now, people want to be slimmer, healthier, stronger, and these drugs will help you to lose weight, but I think you have to try and do it by yourself first. I think you need to invest, rather than investing money into these drugs, invest some money into getting a personal trainer or into a nutritionist or into getting a food coach, someone who can sort of look at your mindset around eating and overeating and stuff like that. That gives you an awareness around food. It gives you an understanding of what you're taking in and how it's actually working within your body. I think if you can change your mindset and change your habits around that, that has to be the first place you start. All of these diets that we jump on, the 5-2 diet, keto, low carb, name your diet, all they're doing are repackaging eating less calories. So you can repackage it in any way you want, but ultimately every single diet out there is a way of making you eat less calories. So these crash diets, I've never really been on board with. Again, I think it's got to be a lifestyle change. If you want to make a lasting difference, you've got to make a long-term change, and that involves your mindset, not just changing your diet for 6 weeks to try and drop weight for summer or whatever it is. Staying on the topic of mindsets, another concern around this is the speed element. So we see this a lot when people try and do a crash diet, like I just spoke about. But if you've been building your weight up over 10, maybe 20 years, and if we asked you, when did you become overweight? You might not actually know, because it happens over such a long period that you don't really notice it's happening until it's happened. Now, the reason I'm speaking about that is because if you've spent 10 years putting on this weight, why are you expecting to take it off in a matter of weeks or months? I think you have to be real with yourself and be honest and understand that this isn't a short-term fix. You've put it on over such a long period. You need to accept that it's going to be a long road ahead to lose it in a healthy, controlled, long-lasting way. Be honest with yourself. Have you actually tried to change your mindset around losing weight? And maybe something I've said has resonated, and maybe you've realized that whilst you might tell yourself that you've tried to count calories or tried to do whatever, maybe you haven't really, you've just told yourself that story. So before jumping on these, really have a long, hard look at your own mindset around food. Another concern I have about these drugs are the fact that they work in the brain. So that, like I said at the start, they're tricking your brain into feeling full. Now, okay, that's beneficial in a way because it stops you eating. But if it stops you eating to the level where you're eating maybe under 1,000 calories a day, now you're in the realm of borderline starvation and almost certainly in some form of nutrient deficiencies, unless you're eating incredibly nutrient dense foods. Now, this is where that aspect of working alongside a professional is massive, because you need to have someone who can tell you what you should be eating in order to hit those nutrient goals, or what you can supplement with alongside it. Because if it is reducing your intake that detrimentally, your body is going to suffer, and you might end up putting yourself in a worse place than you were before you started losing weight, just based on those deficiencies, because they can cause hormonal changes in the body, which can then lead to a myriad of issues. So definitely look at that. The other thing that low calorie intake can do is it can actually mean that a lot of the weight you're losing is lean muscle mass. So I think up to 40% of the weight lost on these drugs is from lean muscle, and that's not a good thing. Now, again, this is where speaking with a professional and being guided by them, if you're going on this journey, is massive. So you need to be hitting those protein goals. So your daily protein targets. As a baseline, people talk about 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight. And that's where I'd start as a general rule. But again, definitely speak to professionals. If you're adamant that you're going to do this, please, 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 if you take one thing away, do it with a professional. And that leads me on to the next concern, really, is the fact that these drugs are so commonly available now. So you can just go online and order them. And I don't actually know if you have to do any testing or proof, but I'm pretty sure you can, even if you do, you can overcome that and you can trick it into like passing you for it, if that's a thing. So I haven't looked too much into how accessible they are, but I do know they are. If you are listening to this right now, you probably know someone that's taking them, whether you know that they're on it or not, but you probably do. I know I do. Now, this is where my concern comes in. So as it gets more available and even cheaper in the future, you're going to get these people who are jumping on it or jumping on and off it, like cycling it almost to just keep at a certain weight or lose that last bit of belly fat just to get it done quickly for a holiday. And it's that sort of weird cycle of being on something, coming off it, seeing the weight go back on because you haven't made those mindset changes that we spoke about at the start. And then just going through that cycle again and again. And I don't think you're really doing anything for yourself mentally by doing that. Now, I was listening to a conversation about these drugs recently, and one of the interesting things that they were pointing out was when you look back over, again, sort of last 30 years maybe, and you see processed foods, how that sort of came into our diets. Now, before that, obesity wasn't a massive thing. As these processed foods became more prevalent, we started eating more and more. And the reason is because a lot of these foods, whilst they're calorie dense, they don't satiate you, so they don't fill you up. So you end up eating more than you would have if you were eating whole foods. What that means is you can eat way more calories than you need or than you even think you're eating, just based on how these processed foods work. With GLP-1 drugs as our counter to this, we've come to this weird place where we've made a artificial problem in processed foods, and now we've given it an artificial solution, which is these drugs. So if we just took both of those things away, we'd be eating whole foods, we'd be full when we were full, and we could probably manage our weight a lot easier. We wouldn't have these processed foods pulling us in with all the drugs and chemicals that trick us into eating them. And I'm not preaching from a high hill or anything. I eat a lot of processed foods myself. I know the appeal of them, but it's just something that allows us to eat so many more calories than we ever would have going back in time. And this is where my whole thing is it's around mindset. It's around being honest with ourselves and all of these things. I've never liked crash diets before these drugs. Crash diets were a thing that people would jump on, these horrifically limiting diets that just cause issues. And how many times have you seen it when you see someone lose all this weight and then you think, wow, they look great, and then suddenly they put it all back on? It's because they haven't changed their mindset. They haven't changed their habits. And that's even more prevalent with this drug. If you start jumping on this drug and it's stopping you eating, okay, yes, physically you've stopped eating as much, but your mind hasn't changed that. So you're only being tricked into feeling full. As soon as that drug's out of you, you're going to start eating. You haven't changed your habits. You might start reaching for that snack between meals that you always used to reach for. You might sit down for Netflix and get out a bowl of popcorn like you always used to, or whatever it is. I'm just making ideas up. So there's a few thoughts on my perception of these drugs, and in specifics about Serena Williams sort of talking openly about it. Now, she speaks about the stigma and reducing the stigma. Now, I think it's a great idea to reduce the stigma around a lot of things, and definitely around people who need to be using these drugs. So there shouldn't be a stigma for them. If someone cannot exercise for whatever reason and they need to lose a bit of weight, this is a brilliant way that we can assist them in doing that, albeit with a professional, also changing their mindset so that when they come off them in the future, nothing changes and they can continue to live their life as they have. Now, I'm concerned about the normalization that this might cause, and how her and other people speaking out about using these drugs can maybe encourage more people to try it. And because they're so accessible, if we're just jumping on them as a first resort rather than a last resort, I just don't think it's a good thing to normalize this. And like I said before, speaking with a personal trainer, nutrition coaches to actually change your habits is the thing that I would suggest investing in first. Just another reminder to say again that I'm not a medical professional in any sense. These are just my thoughts as someone who's worked within the fitness space a bit, and what I sort of think about the process at the minute. And when I look at social media and these unattainable physiques that we see all over, and we end up comparing ourselves, whether we try to or not, it's a dangerous place to be in where this thing is so accessible. And I think we need to be really careful with it going forward. So if you are planning to get on it for whatever reason, then just please speak to a professional first. Don't just jump on it and buy it offline and not run it past anyone, because I think that could end up doing you a lot more harm than good. So there's some of my thoughts on this drug. And if you want to keep the conversation going, please tag me in on Instagram at Lonely Chapter Podcast. Tell me what you think about it. If you haven't already, please do like and subscribe or follow the show. And it really helps the show get shown to new people and gets more people involved in the conversation. Thank you for listening. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.